Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are here with the epilogue of StarCraft Aftermath, created by Christopher Ang. I'm Pronago. Let's head into ending and credits with StarCraft Survivors Chapter 5 Preview. As I understand, StarCraft Survivors only has 4 maps out. For 40 days and nights, the entirety of the Protoss race beheld a serene sight from a distance. But despite this great sign, warring factions finalize preparations and form massive battle lines never seen in all of Protoss history. As they marched, shaking the ground with their pace, Artanis, now appearing aged, exits from the temple, only to feel the coming doom ready to devour Shakuras. Oh, I guess that last mission was on Shakuras. Press start to continue. I cannot move. Finding within himself some form of faith that he can, ultimately in time, unite a people that has been long torn and broken, Artanis channels the temple's fading energies and readies himself, having no assurances in the aftermath of what must be done. The minimap looks like a robot. My base. Whatever this is. Or like an X-Wing, TIE Fighter, something. I don't know, something from Star Wars. Robots are also from Star Wars. To be continued. And now we get to play a trailer for another map? I don't know what's happening here. In the meantime, have fun after the credits. Okay. So I guess this is time for some reflection. To campaign creations, the staff, and friends. I don't think I'm going to narrate this stuff. You can pause and read if you feel like. So, I've already written some, you could even say most of my review for this. I was going to hold off on the story portions until I concluded the whole thing. But, as you can see, there really wasn't much story content in this particular mission. And, I think that there's a fair amount to be said about the overall production. Obviously, I'll get into a lot of the nitty-gritty in my review. Okay, a Protoss Vicar of the Deul has landed on Hire and has launched an assault against Zerg forces moving into the fleet docks. Push back their advance and eradicate all Protoss forces. Press escape to continue. Okay, well, this has nothing to do with Aftermath as a body, so maybe I'll play this in a separate video, as opposed to worrying about it right now. But we could just use this as, again, an opportunity to discuss, like, a basic idea for my opinion on Aftermath that I will then sort of, like, try to sculpt into the review itself, which will be its own thing. So, at this stage, you know, as a reminder, Chris was looking for feedback for the overall project. He feels that he could stand to learn from what would be different about the design philosophies and like the process of creating something like this. And so I'm going to be producing some ancillary content that will hopefully answer some of his questions, but also serve to help other people as well. And hopefully this entire playthrough has been helpful for more than just him, but even if it only helps him, that's job done on my part. I consider that checkbox checked. As far as an epilogue, I don't know that it needed an epilogue. Obviously, that could have just been added to the previous mission, since it was literally like 2 minutes of content. And you could have just added that as like part of the text crawl to the end of the 6th mission, and then had that be the sort of final note. Then there's the credits, and then there you go. What it also speaks to is this. Well, actually, I don't really know what the intention was, or what the desire was when making like a trailer for your next campaign or something like that. But making like a, what did it say? A preview? Chapter 5 preview. So when you're previewing something like that, that is a little strange to me, because you wouldn't really want to, at least the way that I like to do my pipelining, especially after I've had experience with releasing stuff before it's done and showing stuff off before it's done, you're essentially giving an incomplete idea. And I mean, as far as I know, I don't actually know, StarCraft Survivors may have actually been fully released, but imagine a world, for a moment, this may actually be the world that we live in, but imagine a world where StarCraft Survivors never was finished, and you never had, you know, even the final version of the 5th map released, right? Because I only have 4 maps in my folder, so I don't know. Maybe there's only the 4. Maybe there's more. Maybe again, it has been completed since the creation of this campaign. I have no idea. But now imagine a world where you've essentially announced a project, and then not only announced it, but demonstrated that there was like material created for it, but then never delivered on that material. Never went any further than that. You know what I mean? So that is sort of like the concern here, is that not only are you like jumping the gun for one project, like you're sort of saying, hey, don't have any time to think about Aftermath. Immediately start thinking about StarCraft Survivors. Like, you're sabotaging the impact of the epilogue or the final moments of StarCraft Aftermath, like one project, for the sake of like showcasing another. But you're also doing a disservice to StarCraft Survivors, because you don't actually have the opportunity then to properly carve out exactly what StarCraft Survivors is going to be, and then present an honest depiction of what that is in its own release, right? You know, you're sort of like shoehorning some of it into this. So again, I don't know if the intention was like, hey, I really want to have some feedback on StarCraft Survivors, so I'm gonna, release an early preview of Map 5 as part of this campaign, as like part of a hype train or something. I don't really know what the motivation was, but I would urge most content developers, in fact all content developers, to, like, unless they're still trying to iron out their design philosophies and they're using missions or campaigns or like smaller projects or whatever as like not necessarily not putting their all into those campaigns, but using them for first and foremost as vehicles to improve their craft and experiment and try out new things. You know, it's not like I would use the example of like Project Hydra for me. It was not a project that I cared so deeply about that I wanted to make sure it was the best thing possible before releasing it. In fact, even though I don't think that it was a good thing that I released it like halfway before it was done, with only the first half of the campaign done at all, I don't think that was a good thing. But the fact that it, got people interested, and then I got some testers like Sovereign and Sind interested, and they wound up playing a lot of the later stages of the project before, and even beta testing stuff that obviously like that connection would never have been made if I hadn't put out the word that, hey, there's something I'm working on and you can test the first couple of missions now. Like, there's a give and take there. There was some positives to that. But I mostly used that, especially in the last couple of missions of that production, mostly used Project Hydra's Rebel Yell campaign as a vehicle to improve my skills and to experiment with AI and to commission new tools and to figure out where the AI engine's capabilities of Brood War in terms of AI were lackluster, so that I could commission tools from iQuire and Knave to like sort of patch up those problems and to make it so that there was more opportunities for not just me but everybody who's working with AI to work in the future. And I think it was a great success in that regard. Like, if you ask me if I think Project Hydra as a body is like a solid project just on its own merits, I would say no. It's actually really inconsistent. There's like a whole lot of problems with it. I intend to rectify that eventually, but it's not something that I'm super heartbroken that I wasn't able to deliver a solid project when like the prime focus of it was an experiment. Especially at the end of the day, like, it was all experimental stuff. Map 10 wound up being pretty good. I like Map 10. I sort of like Map 2 as well, but for the most part, it's just Map 10. Like, that's the only good map in the entire project as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not really sad about that. I think it's actually a grand success that in my experimentation, I was able to make something that I thought was pretty cool. You're not guaranteed when you experiment. You're not guaranteed to do anything, but, you're going to get better at fundamentals, maybe. For the most part, like 99% of the time, you probably will. You'll at least get better at making maps. But if you're just using it as an experiment, then it's fine to release it in a weird way, a wonky way. But if you're trying to really hone your craft and you're really concerned with like making sure that something is as quality as it can be, then you're going to be working on something over the course of a year, 2 years, however long it takes, and you're going to be what I would recommend people do is to finish their entire project, then go back and that involves like making the maps, script writing, voice acting, creating custom music or commission, whatever you're doing for audio, modding, all this other stuff. Once it's done, then maybe release it to a couple of people privately, or like reach out to some people and say, hey, can you record some tests of this and give me your thoughts so that I can iterate on that further? Or I guess if it's just all the way done, even you don't have the luxury of having, private testers, as it were, you just release it publicly at that point. But at least releasing it publicly without the fanfare or the teaser stuff like what is demonstrated here, I think would be a better option, right? And so I think with that in mind, that's more of an aside. I don't think that I'll even bother getting into that with the review, so it's actually worthwhile content to talk about here. And if it wasn't clear for the rest of this video, if whatever's left in the running time, it's just going to be me talking. So if you're not interested in that, I apologize for not producing interesting content for you. Thank you for viewing up until this point. I'll see you guys in the next video. But yeah, I think that just talking about Aftermath itself, as another campaign that was made for the 2009 campaign contest, I don't necessarily expect it to be up to snuff for modern standards, but to Chris's credit, he unlike Tippereth with Echoes, Chris did update this campaign very recently. I think earlier in 2018. I'll try to get the exact date for the review. And so wasn't like necessarily a comprehensive update, but it was mostly like fixed bugs and stuff, as I understand it. And Chris can always correct me in the comments, obviously. Generally speaking, I would say Aftermath has a lot of problems, but they generally feed back into like the same starting point, which is if you look at the gameplay is usually has like some form of abstraction between it and conventional Brood War, and then also is not consistent. So it's not consistent with conventional Brood War in some way, right? It's not consistent with melee Brood War maps or even like the conventional campaign missions, and it's also not consistent with itself. Because there's like, costs of buildings and units, stats of units in general, especially like map 6 is a good example, but also like photon cannons in map 4, maybe map 5 as well. I don't even know if you could build photon cannons map 4. I didn't even try, didn't even bother. But overlords in map 3. So like stuff is different, and stuff behaves differently from itself in earlier or later missions, and so there's never really a consistent groove you can get into between the maps. And then the maps themselves are also not consistent with convention, so you can't really get into a groove based on your previous experience with StarCraft. So you're not really able to express your skill at the game of StarCraft because you're essentially playing some weird mishmash of StarCraft mixed with what Chris wanted to make or what Chris ended up making, intent or otherwise. So yeah, I would say that the gameplay suffers from that big problem, is that it doesn't adhere to convention, and also doesn't adhere to any new convention that it wants to, like any new level of standard or whatever. And so since it's not consistent at any point, it's really hard to get into a gameplay groove. It's really hard to express your skill consistently. It's really hard to be good at StarCraft Aftermath, because you being good at StarCraft itself doesn't like really give you too much of a leg up. It does give you a leg up in certain respects, sure, but your skill expression is still less, is more limited, I guess, than it would be in a conventional Brood War game of melee or a conventional campaign mission. And it also, you can't really get good at playing StarCraft Aftermath because it's so inconsistent across the different maps. And then you have the issue of the story being really inconsistent on top of it. So there's really a lot of consistency issues is what I'm getting at. Like, this is like the fundamental stuff. Like, I actually don't think that it's so wrong to try to make something different than StarCraft in terms of the gameplay or storytelling convention. Like, you probably want to change a lot based on like the original campaigns made by Blizzard, or even maybe you want to change a lot based on the melee gameplay. Maybe you want to make something that's very different. Maybe you prefer, puzzles that you have to solve in different ways. Maybe you prefer custom tech trees with whole, custom assets and stuff. That's great. That's exciting. Whatever you prefer, you should design to your own taste. But when you're working within StarCraft, the path of least resistance when it comes to gameplay is designing gameplay that works within StarCraft, which means designing to StarCraft's conventions and adhering to those conventions and those design tenets, which is like starting with not so much against an AI that also doesn't start with too much, and having the AI intelligently, operate similar to a human, but with whatever changes that the AI themselves would operate on. So, like, the AI is really good at multitasking, but has poor unit control. It doesn't really have any, micromanagement of its own units in a way that is intelligent. And, you can sort of automate some of that, but not really. Like, it's really pretty rough. It'll often, mow down all of its Marines into 2 lurkers, like we saw in map 3 of this campaign. Even if that wasn't a spawned wave and that was an AI attack wave, maybe it would scan, but otherwise it wouldn't really do much. So it's pretty stupid with its unit control, is the bottom line. But it's really good at multitasking. It's really good at building and spending its money, as long as it has commands to build and spend its money. So, attacking as well. It's pretty good at this stuff. So there's going to be things where it differs from a human opponent, but you should still want to give it personality. You should still want to make it so that it's its skill expression, its gameplay expression, tells a story in and of itself, characterizes it as an opponent. And so that way the gameplay story, the story told by the gameplay is not flying in the face of the story that's told by the text and the audio and the dialogue and whatever else. And like the environment, etc. Like this should all be coalescing to tell the same story, instead of being disparate elements, which is another consistency issue within StarCraft Aftermath. So a lot of it does come down to consistency, because again, going back to my point earlier, I don't think it's necessarily a really horrible thing if you have a situation where you have a something that defies convention, that does something very different than StarCraft. The issue is if you're going to be making a mod or a campaign or whatever for StarCraft, then you're going to have a hard time differing from those conventions and still delivering an objectively efficient sort of execution or presentation or whatever. And so that's where I usually take issue with it, because it's usually not done very well when it's not... Even people trying to make something that works within StarCraft don't necessarily always do it very well. And so it frustrates me when people are trying to reinvent the wheel within StarCraft, where you don't even have the ability to make a wheel, usually. But without even understanding how a wheel is made within StarCraft to begin with. And so that's usually where a lot of my frustration and cussing and dirty words like Mongoloid and Kiss came from. Because, I like to say that a lot. For some reason. So, yeah, I don't know. That's really the fullest extent, I think, of what I'll say here. I'll definitely reference consistency in the review. That's something that I didn't really bring up too much as like a broader topic. And something that is definitely a path to improvement is the consistency. Trying to make it so that if you're going to be doing something different than StarCraft's convention, be consistent with it. Don't make it so that it's jumping all around. And don't be facetious and say like, well, StarCraft Aftermath consistently is inconsistent. Well, because that's not actually useful. So I would definitely say for 100% of the time, you want to be consistent. And you want to make it so that if you're going to change something based on StarCraft convention, you're adding a new mechanic, you're removing an old existing mechanic, whatever you're doing, be consistent with it. And if you're doing something that's new to StarCraft's convention, allow for enough of an onboarding time for players who are unfamiliar with your addition to become familiar based on seeing it executed a certain number of times, based on using it themselves, whatever you're adding. If I add a new ability to a hero, or a new unit behavior to a unit, or add a new unit that behaves differently than any other unit you've ever seen, I've got to tutorialize that somehow so that you have an ample... any player of any level of skill has enough time to, work that into their arsenal, to work that understanding of how that unit works into everything else they understand about StarCraft. And players of varying skill levels will then express their skill level differently based on how well they understood it, how well their execution is, how well they are, how good they are at microing, how good they are at macroing, whatever. How good they are playing StarCraft with my alterations in mind. But I have to tutorialize my alterations, my changes. Otherwise, it's not fair. It's sort of like, in Mission 1, when I scouted out with a bunch of Mutalisks and I started poking at the enemy SCVs mining gas because I didn't have a geyser, and then a billion Wraiths came and destroyed me, I was like, what the fuck? So, that's like almost punishment for trying to go out and find something, because that's something new that Aftermath does that is not done in many other productions, or at least not done that exact way. And so I was not tutorialized in any way, I was just punished from doing that, or for doing that rather. So that's an easy example that I can pull right out of my ass. And with that, I'm going to go right back in my ass and record this review. So stay tuned for the review. Thanks to Chris for making the campaign. Hopefully he finds this feedback useful. Hopefully you guys found the feedback useful. If you have any other thoughts on the very short epilogue or anything that I've brought up in the very long sort of diatribe afterwards, then please make it known in the comment section or reach out to him on Discord, and we will have a lovely, happy time improving each other's lives and design philosophies.